You know, I kind of love the idea of us covering different X-Men events, and I really can't wait to get into Operation Zero Tolerance. But as we all know, we got to work our way up to it, right? Because we got a lot of storylines to cover that lead into the actual event. Like, for example, the idea of Nate Gray meeting Peter Parker, Spider-Man. Like, for me personally, this is kind of weird. Like, good storyline, but kind of out of nowhere. For me personally, I would never think like, what would it be like if Nate Gray met Peter Parker? Like, how that whole thing go down? And the thing is, we got a 2-part storyline that kind of shows us what it's like for Nate Gray to meet Peter Parker. Now, there are a few things we need to know about before we officially dive into the storyline, but for the Spider-Man side, because as we all know right now, we're currently doing this massive X-Men reading order. But when it came to this storyline, it does take place after the Clone Saga, so Ben Reilly died. Unfortunately for Mary Jane Peter Parker, they lost their baby as well, and also Aunt May died as well. So like, a lot of things happened in the 1990s for Spider-Man, but when it comes to the Kingpin, he's no longer around either. And so with the Kingpin no longer being around, you have different people trying to replace him. Like, for example, you have a guy out there known as Black Tarantula. Now, for Black Tarantula, he's trying his best to make a footing in New York. And so what he did was he sent one of his guys up there to begin the process, better known as El Uno. Now, when it came to El Uno, he ran into another group out there that's being run by the New Rose. Now, when it came to the New Rose, well, he sent out his minion, better known as Delia. And so she was able to, beat El Uno. He got arrested, but as we get into the opening pages of this storyline, El Uno had escaped police custody and now trying his best to get revenge. Now, when it comes to Nate Gray around this time in Marvel Comics, it was him trying his best to make a life for himself. Because for Nate Gray, as we all know, the dude came from the age of apocalypse reality. And so for Nate, with him now being the main Marvel universe, it's just him trying to adjust to this reality. And so he's trying to use his powers to help out other people by reading their minds to kind of figure out what is their actual struggles and how can he help them. And so for Peter Parker, he got word about Nate Gray because Nate Gray is getting really popular in the area. So for the Daily Bugle, they want some pictures of Nate doing what he does at the park, which is helping people out. Now for Nate, he does see Peter Parker, and he read the mind of Peter, knowing that who he is, what he can do, and also why he is there for. And so you have Nate ask Peter to go somewhere else quietly. But this is really more of Peter Parker trying to teach Nate Gray how to be more responsible when it comes to his powers. Let me explain. Because for Nate Gray, he quickly does use his powers to hide him and Peter in the crowd of people. Then once again, he used his powers to take them over to a nearby building. And then literally right after that, you have Nate Gray use his powers again to get rid of the clothes that Peter Parker was wearing, to no longer hide the fact that the dude is Spider-Man. And so is Peter saying, have you lost your mind? Like, here you are right now just using your powers just out in the open. Like, dude, you gotta be more responsible. Now, as we all know, this is Peter Parker gonna do the whole with great power comes great responsibility lesson that he had learned from Uncle Ben. Thinking that for Nate Gray, he does not understand how to be more responsible when it comes to his powers. But this is more of Peter Parker and Nate Gray kind of realizing that they're kind of alike with one another. Because for Peter Parker, as we all know, he had Uncle Ben who taught him with great power comes great responsibility. And at first, for Peter, he feels like that Nate does not understand that. But it's Nate saying like, no, I had my Uncle Ben. He died, and he's talking about his version of Forge from his reality, who was basically like his father. When Forge died, he's saying, that's when I realized with my great power comes great responsibility. And he used that great power to fight against Apocalypse in his reality to defeat Apocalypse in that reality. Now, technically for me, once he did come over to the main Marvel universe, he was a tad bit reckless, fighting against all these different X characters for no good actual reason to me personally. But either way, it's Peter and Nate kind of realizing that they're alike. And so you have Peter say, you know what? Come with me. And so what Peter did next was he took Nate Gray over to their home with Mary Jane and Anna, where they were able to have a Christmas dinner with one another. And I kind of like this a lot. But while you have those, four people being able to sit down with one another to have this Christmas dinner, where you do have Peter Parker and Nate Gray being able to build that bond with one another, well, you have El Uno going after Delilah. And so you do have those two characters fight against one another, but you do have El Uno lose that battle very easily. And so, of course, you're going to have Delilah, had a hard time saying that, sent the head of El Uno back to his boss, which, of course, is the Black Tarantula. And so now we have to shift over to X-Men issue number 24. And when we do, we pick up with a character known as Trinity. Now, for Trinity, around this time in Marvel Comics, she was known as the lover to Nate Gray. But around this time, they also had a fallout. So, of course, she's kind of being sad and depressed at the moment. And we see her walking around the terminal cancer ward at the Empire State Hospital. And the reason why, because when it comes to her ability, let's not forget here that she can absorb the energy of people who are dying and then use that energy as a way to release a blast. She also has the ability to kind of speed up someone's death. So if they're dying, she can go ahead and kind of help them on their way. So it's her just walking through this cancer ward, just killing off people left and right. And the reason why, because she's depressed about losing Nate Gray. And just in case we have anybody joining our coverage over this series, I will explain why her and Nate Gray had a fallout here in a moment. But we do shift over to Peter Parker, Mary Jane, and Anna. While you do have all three characters being able to spend Christmas with one another. Now for Peter Parker, this is pretty hard because yes, they lost a baby, but also they lost Aunt May as well. So this is their first Christmas without Aunt May being around. But you also have Peter's spider sense go off and realize that there's somebody hiding in a neighbor's basement. And so you have Peter head over there to see what in the world is currently going on. And that is when you have Peter find Nate Gray. Now for Nate Gray, it does seem like he was recently attacked by a vampire. And the reason why, because it does look like he's turning into one. Well, technically he was attacked by one. Morbius, the living vampire. Now for Peter, he does inform us, the readers, but also Nate Gray, that when it comes to Morbius, yes, he may drink blood, but he does not create other vampires at all, because he's not your usual supernatural vampire. But somehow Nate Gray is slowly turning into a vampire, it seems like. Now, technically, it could be because when Morbius had bit Nate Gray, it kind of builds some kind of mind connection thanks to Nate Gray's powers. Either way, for Nate, he right now wants to find Trinity. And so for Peter, he agrees to help Nate Gray out. Now, I kind of want to shift back over to the Hellfire Club, and here's the reason why. Because in an earlier storyline that we did not cover, and the reason why, because the backup story in the annual, and honestly, 2 pages long, and that is it. When it came to Madeline Pryor, she was attacked by Tessa. And with her being attacked by Tessa, it basically helped her remember things from her past. Like, for example, Scott Summers, the X-Men, being a clone of Jean Grey, Mr. Sinister, but especially the idea that she had a child, better known as Cable. And so it's her now beginning to remember things from her past. Now, I kind of want to go ahead and shift back over to Trinity to explain what's going on with her character, why her and Nate Gray have issues at the moment. You see, when it comes to Trinity, she was working for Mr. Sinister. Now, she was able to escape from him, but when it came to Mr. Sinister being able to capture Nate Gray, he put the idea in his mind that there's a possibility that Trinity is still working for Mr. Sinister, which means that even though Nate Gray does have feelings for her, it's still a possibility it's all fake. Like the whole idea of their relationship, because she could be working for Mr. Sinister. Now, she has been trying her best to prove it, but every single time they get close enough to being happy, that gets brought up again. And so it's her just kind of running away from her problems and not really trying to work things out with Nate Gray. And the same thing goes for him as well. Now, that is when you have Morbius confront Trinity. Here's the reason why, because when it came to Morbius, when he bit Nate Gray earlier, it kind of built some kind of connection. And so with that connection, it allowed Morbius to understand that Nate Gray has strong feelings for Trinity. And so with those strong feelings, you have Morbius go find her, which he did. Now, when he did find her, he kind of realized she's also facing problems like he is. Very similar. The whole idea of the hunger. Like she has to feed off energy of the dead while he needs blood to survive. And so it's him saying like Nate Gray can truly never understand what you're going through. But you do have Nate Gray and also Spider-Man being able to find Trinity and Morbius. You do have the four characters kind of fight here, but in the middle of the battle, you have Nate Gray being able to push out Morbius influences. So now he's turning back to normal. But you do have Morbius run away, and you do have Spider-Man go chase after him. Now, technically, the story does continue on in a third chapter when it comes to Spider-Man chasing down Morbius, and we're not going to cover that issue right there. But when it comes to Trinity and Nate Gray, they now have a chance to talk to one another. And really, their conversation is very short here. And the reason why, because once you have Nate Gray turn back to normal, it's really more of Nate Gray kind of informing Trinity that he knows what she has been up to. Like, hey, I know that you've been going around killing golf people who've been on the verge of dying. You know, they have cancer or some other kind of disease. But for Nate Gray, it's still not okay. Now, it's also the fact that for a brief moment, it did seem like she was happy to be with Morbius. And the reason why, because he understands what she's going through, the whole idea of the hunger. But it's Nate Gray saying like, I can help you, but you need to choose for yourself if you want that help or you don't want that help. And so you have Nate Gray leave. Now, right after he does leave, that is when you have Madeline Pryor appear. And when Madeline Pryor does appear, it's kind of like, okay, where could this possibly go next? But this is where we're going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later.